I've done, as you know, hundreds of radio phone-ins over the years on UFOs and people calling in. It's all anecdotal. But I would say on those various phone-ins that I've done, there have been dozens at the very least, and probably more than dozens, of people who have described their sighting, their UFO that they've sighted, as blinking in and blinking out, sometimes both ways, sometimes blinking out and then reappearing. Very often blinking out at the end of the sighting, and that's not moving away or a cloud coming, it could be a cloudless sky. I've experienced that myself too. It's one of the phenomena, and it suggests, it indicates their power over matter. They have power over matter and power over gravity that terrestrial physics doesn't grasp yet. And that's admitted by very senior people in the US Navy and in US intelligence and in the military.
The Spiritual Freedom Show with Richard Lawrence, where politics is not the answer, materialism counts for nothing, and spirituality will set you free.
Richard.
Darren.
So I thought I'd start by saying some a little bit of good news, which is to thank everybody who's joined us on this journey of spiritual revelation this last 2.5 years on the Spiritual Freedom Show. We learned just a few days ago that we were actually ranked 4th in the 10 best European spirituality podcasts, which that brings joy to my heart, because it means that these teachings, these incredible teachings, are reaching so many more people.
Yeah, I'd like to really thank all our viewers, listeners as well. Thank you very much.
So today we're going to roll right in. I'd like to talk about the search for extraterrestrial life. Now, I think most people are probably familiar with SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, right, that institute, who describe themselves, just read here, as a research organization devoted to searching for evidence of technological civilizations that may exist elsewhere in the universe, particularly in our galaxy. But as far as we know, they haven't necessarily found anything yet, probably because they're looking for life as we know it. Now, earlier this week, a little bit different, I was reading an article in a magazine called The Scientific American, which described the search for alien life. But what was encouraging in their case is that they were now talking about searching for life not as we know it, in the sense that they said, we're looking for a non-Earth-centric approach to life detection. But fundamentally, it's the same, as you can imagine. It's still, ultimately this search for kind of basic or primitive biology. So, at this point, I want to turn it over to you. Like, what are we kind of getting wrong here? How should we be searching for extraterrestrial life? And do we already have answers that we can talk about?
Terrestrial ego.
That's basically what's wrong.
Because if you go back 400 years,
and
it is roughly, I think it was 1616, that the then Pope and his council, whoever it was, declared, the Inquisition it was actually, declared the heliocentric idea, the idea that the Earth revolves around the sun rather than the other way around, declared that to be foolish, absurd, and heretical. And Galileo had to be silent. Even before him, Copernicus had basically not felt he could publish in his lifetime that very basic fact, the heliocentric universe, or the heliocentric solar system, I should say. The idea that planets revolve around suns. It was believed and it was assumed, and this is the point I'm making, it was a scientific assumption which is really unscientific.
Totally.
That, for 1,800 years, I think, going back to Aristotle and so forth, that we are the center of we must be the center of the universe, just assumed. No evidence, no deduction, just an assumption. Same thing is happening right now. NASA, the other organizations, there's actually a nickname, an old nickname for NASA, which is never a straight answer. Anyway,
you can imagine where that comes from.
But putting that to one side, the same old thing. It's an assumption. It's not scientific. They think it's scientific. How do they know? And the assumption now is that if there is alien life out there, it has to be life as we know it. If we can't live on a planet, nobody can. They don't know that. They know there's dark matter. They know 95% of the matter and mass in the universe is not visible or detectable to us, and yet they still make this dogmatic, it is a dogma, assumption that life has to be as we know it. So when they find exoplanets, they're looking to see if any of them could be habitable. In other words, could have water, could have oxygen, could have the conditions under which we could exist. And if they couldn't, there's no life there.
Yeah.
And they think that they call themselves scientists. That's not scientific. In fact, the real scientists, traditionally in the going way back, of course, were the alchemists, but is the mystic. Some of the mystics aren't scientific enough, I would say, on the other side of the equation. So, getting to your point, though, it's to be welcomed that they're even using words like "not as we know it."
Yeah.
But they've got a long way to go, and especially when it comes to the multi-dimensional universe.
Well, let's talk about that, because you sort of hinted at that a little bit. But
Yeah.
but how do we go beyond the life as we know it, biology not as we know it, to something more than that, which is the true nature of?
We're going to multiple frequency existence, and there is a tie-up because, look, lately I've been focusing as well as on UFOs and extraterrestrial life and the cosmic wisdom, on psychic matters as well. And people might say, well, that's two different things. Actually, no, they're very linked in.
Yeah.
And a psychic who doesn't have cosmic vision, and let's face it, a basic psychic doesn't. They're not advanced enough. But they are able to see life on this planet that's not detectable to the normal eyesight, if they are correct, if they are accurate, if they are clairvoyant. And also you can have clairaudience. So these are higher faculties of the basic senses. And they are in the lingo of our language. I mean, people say, I've picked up a thought, I've got a funny taste in my mouth. All these colloquial sayings, a funny vibe, a funny feeling, I've got a gut instinct, etc.
Yeah.
People have this faculty, but they don't believe in it. And in particular, scientists don't believe in it. And that's another dogma.
Yeah.
And it prevents them from developing it. But the point I'm leading to is that there is a frequency, I'm going to call it a dimension, although the word dimension can be used in different ways.
Yeah.
And for Aetherius Society people, let me say, the 7 dimensions of creation, as taught by Dr. George King and the Cosmic Masters, is a slightly different use of the same word. And I'm now using it in a way that most people would use it, which is other levels, other frequencies of existence. So just as the psychic, and I'm one of them, and there are millions, I should say, of others around the world, and in fact everybody can unlock their psychic powers actually, if they choose to, are detecting life on another frequency. So if you go to Mars, if you go to Venus, if we're able to, and in the case of Dr. King, he did go out of his body to those planets. He's not the first one. I think Count Saint Germain, the great ascended master, projected into space above Mount Vesuvius in Italy. Wow. And I've got an interesting account of that, actually, but that's another thing. So it has happened through history, but rarely you have to be very advanced to project beyond this planet. Yeah. You can just certainly have out-of-body experience, we've talked about that before, on this planet. But if one was able to, then one would see life there, even though it's not physically detectable. And I'm a believer, and more than a believer, actually, I'm absolutely sure that throughout this galaxy there is a weave of luminous threads which are the trajectories of spacecraft. And they are not just threads on one level, they're multi-frequency threads. So whereas here we have sightings, I've had them, others have had them, of UFOs, and some of those UFOs are actually extraterrestrial spacecraft, I'm 100% sure of that. If one was able to see beyond what this level we're on, and one was able to see throughout the galaxy, I'm absolutely sure one would see this wonderful tapestry of woven threads of the trajectories of multiple spacecraft traveling through and different frequencies at different levels.
I'm going to take some time to try and visualize that, because that's a beautiful image, isn't it? About also the interconnectedness of life throughout the galaxy. That's sort of that's like part of what it speaks to.
And one thing I would say about them, they are making journeys, I would say, if not entirely, but certainly for the most part, that are the right journeys.
Okay.
The journeys they are meant to make from an evolutionary point of view. I'm even talking now about the physical, if you can call it that journey, the space journey. they know that journey is necessary, not just, most people here make journeys to go on holiday, to visit friends, to visit relatives, to what have you, because they want to, and we all do that sometimes. But I would say, and I'm not going to be dogmatic here, that the vast majority, if not all, I don't know, but certainly the vast majority of those journeys are essential journeys being made by intelligences who know where they have to go then and why.
I guess that's the difference between living...
For a higher reason.
Yeah, living consciously in order to evolve and sort of living unconsciously and sort of meandering our way through existence.
And that's why they have the powers, the knowledge, the abilities.
It's part of the secret, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
But it is interesting that our sort of, reality to some extent as defined by mainstream science is sort of limited by the instruments through which we can observe the world around us.
Yeah.
And, and they do have limitations. We've even discovered that over the last several hundred years just in this physical plane, let alone, on other planes of existence like you're talking about.
Yeah.
But, and it's, like you say, it was the mystic who was able to use their own senses as an instrument of perceiving the world around them beyond just the physical world that we see, extending it into the other realms and being able to see, as you say, with their clairvoyant sight, with their clairaudience, be able to see this richness of existence that's around us. Yeah. And I just wanted to, come back to basically what we're saying is that even on Earth, there are other planes, frequencies of existence, which are not remote from us. I mean, these are people who have passed on, who are living there until they're ready to reincarnate again and come back. It's not like some other complete world. It's like, it's all part of the experience even that we have between lives. Yeah. And so it seems just natural that we can extend the same principle throughout the galaxy and the universe in which we live. Yeah. So just bringing it back to the search for extraterrestrial life then, when we talk about, what Dr. King claimed, even as early as the 1950s, I mean, what was he saying there that's.
Well, he spoke about his own out-of-body visits to Mars, to Venus, which I fully believe. And he talked from the very, very beginning. In fact, the first public meeting he ever held, which I'm pretty sure was January the 29th, 1955, in the Caxton Hall in London, about, I'm not quoting word for word here, but it's apparently invisible higher nature of these craft. So he was quite different, actually, from other UFO or flying saucers, they were known, speakers in those days, or those who claimed contacts. Right from the beginning, he was talking about this. And I met a good friend of his, actually, by the name of Rex Dutter, who ran an organization called Viewpoint Aquarius. Well, a fairly good friend. He'd known him from the early days. He was roughly the same age, passed on some time ago. He was also a very well-known theosophist, and he was one of the custodians of the Mahatma letters, which were written to Madame Blavatsky. I'm going off topic here, but which are in the British Museum. Wow. Yeah, one of the trustees of those letters. Yeah. I met him in there once, actually, when he was reviewing some of them. Wow. Yeah, but this Rex Dutter told me, and he knew Dr. King from the beginning, right from the beginning. He was saying this. He was making this point about the higher dimensional life. I'd like to come back, if I may, though, to this thing about ridicule. Oh, yeah. Because I think viewers, listeners of this show, the Spiritual Freedom Show, need to be armed. They need to have a scepter with which to fight skepticism. I like it. They need to go forward confidently, like we all do, because we have a barrage. One of the great weapons of ignorance, and it's one of the weapons of the dark forces too, is ridicule. It's not the worst thing. I mean, Giordano Bruni, who lived at the same time roughly as Copernicus and Galileo, and was very outspoken about the cosmology of the universe and life on other planets, then, we're talking the 16th century, or early 17th century. He, actually, let me get that right. I don't want to give wrong information. No, 16th century, Giordano Bruni. He was burnt at the stake. Gosh. So there's worse things than ridicule. Yeah. Galileo was ordered by a cardinal to remain silent on this matter, which he did, actually, for some years until another pope was selected, and then he started to speak again. Copernicus felt he couldn't publish this until I think the last printed page of his book was delivered on the day he died. Wow. Much later, Swedenborg, who had contacts, direct contacts, I believe they are genuine contacts, with intelligences from other planets in this solar system, felt he couldn't publish that in his book Earths in the Universe. There's some extracts from it in my book UFOs and the Extraterrestrial Message, which I published with the permission of the Swedenborg Society, let me say, so thanks to them. But he felt he couldn't publish that in his lifetime. So this was very dangerous belief.
Yeah.
Now it's ridicule, it's words like foolish and absurd. They've been hurled at me for saying there was a government cover-up on UFOs, which we all know now, which governments admit now.
Yeah.
So it's going to be the same with alien life. We aren't there yet. The stigma is going on UFOs, very much so in the last 2 or 3 years. Hasn't yet gone on the idea of multi-dimensional life. It will. So, let's be brave, let's be strong. Let's not be worried about ridicule, even if it comes from our own family or friends.
Yeah.
We have a very strong belief, and it will prove to be a correct one.
Yeah, it's a good point because this is what we're saying here, what we're claiming is apparently in the face of scientific findings, but really it's more like scientific dogma, isn't it?
It's a scientific assumption that they start from, and it's a very unscientific approach because they don't know, but they say, oh no, there's no life there because we can't live there.
Yeah, what has that got to
Nonsense.
do with other life?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've talked a little bit about some of the examples of the evidence that we can offer to people, at least, so they can consider this. And one of them is, Dr. King projecting from his physical body to other planets, and documenting his experience.
It's evidence. To me, it's evidence. I mean, some people say, well, anyone could say that,
Suppose.
So whether they'd regard that as evidence, but I mean, if you study the life of Dr. King, he was the most remarkable man. I mean, I think whatever your views, you'd have to say this is one of the most remarkable people who ever lived in numerous ways. And I was lucky to know him really well and be among his greatest friends, and he mine. And as well as being a follower of his, and I still am a follower of his. But he really was a brave, courageous, quite a shy individual who didn't enjoy the media or the public platform, but was very. I mean, the strangest thing about him actually was he was sometimes shy, not among his close friends and followers, but at the same time always supremely confident. Which is those two don't normally go together.
No.
But then he wasn't from this earth, so it's unusual. There were these traits that this doesn't quite fit, and he was confident because he knew, and that's the greatest confidence anybody can have.
Totally. Yeah. So we've got obviously his experiences, which you can find in a book called "You Are Responsible." Actually, if you want to read those and judge for yourself.
Absolutely.
And you've also talked about Swedenborg and his experience, though, because that's quite a unique thing in history, isn't it?
It's interesting. I mean, it doesn't compare to Dr. King. I found it what I found particularly interesting wasn't so much the messages he received, although they are there. And he claimed contact with beings from several planets in this solar system.
Yeah.
But the description he made of trance, I always find that very interesting. I don't think he called it trance, but he describes, and it's published in my book. What sort of state he entered, and it's published in this book, Earths in the Universe by Swedenborg. And what's very authentic about that, it's a bit like Wordsworth when he described in the ode Tintern Abbey, the state he entered, which was clearly samadhic. And Swedenborg, it was clearly, I would say, if not samadhic, borderline, on the border of that, very advanced trance condition, I would call it, just from his description. And yet, he wasn't familiar with channeling as we now know it. He had no access to Eastern wisdom any more than Wordsworth did, the Kundalini and the effects of it. So it's a very interesting account. I don't think, myself, and just based on the content, it's 100% accurate. So when it comes to mediumship, which is to me an absolutely fascinating topic, but you have this strange thing that you can be more advanced, but less accurate. In a strange way, I can understand that, because in a small way, as I've developed and as I've started to be able to gain contact with higher intelligences on higher levels than I could before, it can also be more difficult to concentrate. Because of the sort of blissful sensations that start to come. And you know, so I'm not judging when I say that, but so I think he's an example. Now, lots of very accurate psychic mediums who can get relatives and fairly basic messages, you know, about almost like recipes for soup, or it's not quite that, but it can be very basic.
Yeah.
It might even be that, actually. Which is that person shouldn't be.
No, shouldn't be giving recipes
They
for
should be
soup.
moving on
Oh,
now.
for God's sake.
But you know, they could be very accurate, is my point, but not nearly as elevated. So Swedenborg, to me, would be one of those who's in an elevated category. He was a brilliant man in numerous ways, by the way. He was a scientist, a theologian. I think he was an expert in clocks, irrigation. He was and in Parliament, I think. But you know, he was elevated, but I don't think it's entirely accurate. And this is where Dr. King sets the benchmark on everything. I mean, Dr. King's benchmark on cosmic consciousness, just to bring us to the fifth freedom in the 9 freedoms. It's a wonderful freedom, it's an absolute Bible of advanced information for the aspirant, the fifth freedom. But he gives his, I don't know whether he entered it specially for the book. It wouldn't surprise me if he did, by the way.
Wow.
Because, you know, he was perfectly capable of that when he wrote this book. I think it was 1962 when he was writing this, and I think it was on Balboa Island, which is near Newport Beach.
Oh, right, okay.
But he wrote it with the help of Monique,
Okay.
later his wife. And it's so accurate, the way he describes it. I don't think, this is only my opinion, that he's like remembering something from 5 years earlier.
I see.
You know, to me, and I think he would. He'd certainly be capable of saying, "Okay, I've got to write about cosmic consciousness. Well, let's do it." That was him. He would do it, and then he'd
Who
write it.
can do that? Yeah.
And the description. I mean, the state of Yogananda, and I love Yogananda. He talks about cosmic, and there are many others. There's a book by Buck, which is recommended in the 9 freedoms about cosmic consciousness.
Oh, yeah,
but those states aren't. I mean, it shows his humility to even put them in the same ballpark.
Yeah.
They aren't the state described in the fifth freedom. And not even Yogananda. Yogananda is a wonderful, very elevated condition, but it isn't the same. And so I'm just saying that Dr. King set the absolute benchmark also for mediumship, which is just on another level from, we've said this before, but every other medium that I've ever heard of, including Swedenborg.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that goes into another point here, which is that, you know, the teachings that he received through his mediumship from beings which claim to be on other planets in this solar system, on higher realms, is again points the way, I think, for people, you know, in this conversation of search for extraterrestrial life, you know, to what we're talking about, you know, with not just beings in other realms, but extremely advanced spiritually and technologically, millions of years more advanced than ourselves, in our own solar system, on higher realms of existence, offering us this spiritual teaching.
Yeah, and I think once you get the 9 freedoms, for example, and you see that it works, and you can see that it works. I mean, you can see that bravery, the way it's depicted, works. Love energy especially, you can absolutely prove to yourself. All those steps, you can find them working out, and you can see through experience, not just logic, although logic's a great thing, and not even just intuition, which is an even greater thing, but through experience that this is true. Once you recognize that it's true, you recognize that Dr. George King is authentic, then you can accept his teachings about life on Mars, life on Venus, life on Jupiter. Because those masters who gave those teachings, if he wasn't accurate, if his other teachings weren't right, they wouldn't be going on giving them. And they continued right up to the last months of his life in 1997.
And that's over 40 years, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. One last point here that I think might be useful for people is just bring it back to the UFO phenomenon for a moment, and just some of the behavior that has been observed of them, which is, you know, the one I think that's most relevant here is this kind of blinking in and out of existence. I mean, do you want to tell us a little bit about how that relates to what we're talking about?
I mean, I think, you know, all this UFO, or UAP as they now call it, info that's coming out, and it's being looked at by NASA now, and it's being looked at, and actually they have made an appeal, NASA, by the way, very recently, for civilians to provide them with their
with their cameras and
stuff. Up to now, it's been mainly military personnel. But I've done, as you know, hundreds of radio phone-ins over the years on UFOs and people calling in. It's all anecdotal. But I would say on those various phone-ins that I've done, there have been dozens at the very least, and probably more than dozens, of people who have described their sighting, their UFO that they've sighted, as blinking in and blinking out, sometimes both ways, sometimes blinking out and then reappearing. Very often blinking out at the end of the sighting, and that's not moving away or a cloud coming, it could be a cloudless sky. I've experienced that myself too. It's one of the phenomena, and it suggests, it indicates their power over matter. They have power over matter and power over gravity that terrestrial physics doesn't grasp yet. And that's admitted by very senior people in the US Navy and in US intelligence and in the military. The capabilities of these crafts, and even if they say it's only 5%, I think it could be a lot more. But let's just say it was 5% of these sightings that they even have.
Right.
That's enough. I mean, you only need one, actually. And you've
True,
proved the whole point.
It's there, yeah.
And they have this, as you rightly say, this power of invisibility, actually in contacts with the gods from space, and even earlier than that, in a little booklet called The Flying Saucers, I think it was called, and I think it's still available. But in contacts with the gods from space in 1996, we published not only the invisibility capability, but how it was done. And when I say we, I mean Dr. George King. I just was the co-author. It was him, and it's in his words. So it's fully described, and it relates to the beginning of what you opened the show with: life, alien life. Until you grasp their capability over matter. And I think the big thing to remember is we are all evolving.
Yeah.
We're all going back to God, Brahma, reality, whatever you care to call it. We're going back in that direction. And as we go back, it's no longer, we come back to our great thing in the seventh freedom. It's transmutation, not transmigration. And that means life is being risen. All the time life is being risen. So we're on a pretty basic level. There are people right now on level, let's say, this is level 1, level 5, who would tell us that. Level 5 of Earth. And never mind level 6, who would tell us that. They'd tell us this is a much more refined, much more sublime, much more inspirational place to be in the etheric and mental realms than here. Now, we're talking about intelligences way above even someone living on level 5, way above, which people on level 5 would admit and know and revere. And so they aren't going to be hidebound to this level on Mars, on Venus, on Jupiter. They are rising and they are transmuting much faster. It's exponential. And so, of course, it's going to be a much more refined, more elevated level, above our capability of detection, unless they choose to be detected, which sometimes they do.
Well, I think that's a fantastic explanation, actually, in the context of of the transmutation point that you've made, and life is all being risen. Of course, naturally, then they would be existing on a higher plane. And even just to balance that with the technological element of it. I mean, if some of these UFOs are really extraterrestrial and they've been able to visit Earth from millions of light years away, right? Which we with our basic technology would take millions of years. Obviously, they're able to do it in an extremely short amount of time. They must have some mastery over matter that we have not yet been able to achieve.
And the speeds and the distances aren't. I mean, this is freely admitted. Our physics is just. I mean, forget it.
In comparison,
it'd be like looking at some sort of dark ages. I don't know, practitioner of herbalism. So nothing against herbalism. It can be really good.
Letting the blood and stuff like that.
Explain a computer. It's just, and much more so than that. Actually, the herbalist could be a lot more spiritual than some of the computer technicians. Not you. But you get my point. I mean, it's impossible to even begin to grasp. That's the first intelligent place to get to, is to say, as some top people in the American military have got to, but not all by any means. They are way beyond us in their technology and in their advancement.
And I think, just to close that leaves me with a real sense of inspiration and even awe. That this search for extraterrestrial life is not like looking for microbes on some other planet or some exoplanet. This is about recognizing and even seeing the answers that have been ready given to us from beings advanced more technologically and spiritually, millions of years so than us, who are not just here in our own solar system on other planets, but actually offering us a hand of their help as well.
They are. But I'm going to add one little sad note to end with. I have to add it, which is that the planets themselves, and especially our planet, the Mother Earth, they are holding themselves back to enable life. And that's the nature. The galaxy, the planets, the suns, the purpose, the nature of their existence, the reason for their existence is to enable other life forms to... Otherwise, these planets wouldn't be on this level at all. We'd be in some vortex. But they are here and they're staying here, even though some of the races are progressing upon them and advancing to higher and higher and higher levels. And it is exponential growth. It's not like we're going along like this. I mean, they're going, the distances are getting greater because that's the nature of spiritual development. Even on this earth, actually, it's the nature of spiritual development. Once you really start to advance, you can advance far, 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 far more and more quickly. It doesn't stay the same.
Thank you, Richard. Deep, profound.
Hey everybody, it's Darren here. Thanks for tuning into the show. Now, if you enjoyed that episode, don't forget to subscribe for more wisdom from the 9 Freedoms. If you'd like to find out more about the 9 Freedoms, about Mars Sector 6 by Dr. George King, go to our website, that's aetherius.org. Richard and I love hearing from you, receiving your comments, your questions on your spiritual experiences, and talking about them on the show. So do write to us, share them with us at spiritualfreedom@richardlawrence.co.uk. Always remember that service is the jewel in the rock of attainment. See you next time.